A Little in Love, Disc 4.
He loves them. He seemed to love so much. And what did I love? I wasn't sure that I had any friends, and I didn't know Paris as well as he did. As we left the bridge and wandered on, I said, "Marius, may I ask?" He smiled, turned his head. "What are your dreams?" It was a big question. I knew that, but he didn't seem to mind. "My dreams?" "Yes. What you imagine when you're alone. What you hope for in the future." He kept his smile, but it looked a little sadder. "I'm not sure I've been asked this before." He thought a while. "I want France to be a republic, of course. No more kings and queens." "But for yourself?" He seemed bashful, suddenly. "It doesn't suit a man to talk of love, not unless he's a poet or an artist and can afford to have such dreams. But I was a lonely child and, well, I think I'd like a family of my own one day. A wife to love." He smiled. "Who knows?" "I'd like that too. A person to love." "You don't have that now?" I couldn't speak for a while. The sun was low, and I could feel myself trembling inside. Were we really talking like this? Him and me? He pointed out the tiny things I had never seen before. How doves perched on the stonework of Notre Dame and the urchins playing in the fountains near Les Invalides. It made me think of Gavroche again, but they were all too old to be him. Poor Gavroche. "See the light now, Eponine? How it's catching the sides of the houses?" It was gold and orange. I nodded. This was his Paris. It was real, not perfect like in romance novels. I knew that he saw the begging and dirt, the drunks and the thin scavenging dogs, and I knew that he longed for it to end. "When Lamarck makes us a republic again," he said. But then he pointed out a single weed growing through a cracked wall, like he was a bird high up. "See that?" "Yes." "It's a beautiful thing too, don't you think?" "Yes." And I did. Everything was. He took my hand very briefly to help me over a ditch, and I thought, he's holding my hand, and we fit perfectly. I wanted the walk to last forever, but too soon the Gorbeau stood before us. "Eponine," he said, "thank you for your company. I've enjoyed it." "Me too." His face was glowing from a day in the sun. His lashes were so long that they seemed to brush his cheekbones when he looked down to find his key. He was a boy who loved his friends and sunlight and France and the sound of urchins playing, and he wanted love, just like I did. "Good night," he said, and opened his door. After he'd gone, I looked at the number 4 and knew it was all too late now. I loved him. I could feel it inside me. "Good night," I whispered. Generous and smart. He hadn't called me beautiful, but it didn't matter. I'd felt it in his company. He'd made me feel beautiful and interesting for the first time in my life. The Rose Amongst the Roses. I wanted to walk with him all the time, but also I didn't want him to see too much of me and get bored, or to think with a sigh, "There she is again." I wanted to be a surprise to him, a chance meeting, a happy coincidence that made him say, "Ah, it's good to see you again." I told myself, "Be casual, Eponine. Don't let yourself be seen for a while. Give him a chance to miss you. I busied myself elsewhere for 3 whole weeks. I tried my hardest, but in the end, I couldn't stay away. One bright July day, I saw him walking southwest, away from the Seine. Not the Café Musain. So where? I followed him further into the quarter called Saint-Germain. This was where the university was, and there were lots of cafes and bars here too. There was a fiddler busking on a street corner, and I saw Marius pause and give him a coin. He said, "You play very well." He kept walking. He crossed the boulevard Saint-Germain and turned left. Ahead of us there were tall iron gates, wide open, and beyond them I could see more greenery than I'd seen in 8 months of living in Paris. The grassy lawn was huge. The trees were emerald green. Flower beds were like rainbows with all the colours in them. Marius walked through those gates and into the garden. I stopped a passer-by. "Monsieur, excusez-moi, what's this place called?" He answered as if I was an idiot. "Why, these are les Jardins du Luxembourg." He walked away, shaking his head. Les Jardins du Luxembourg. I'd heard of them. They were the elegant gardens that surrounded Le Palais du Luxembourg itself, and it was here that ladies strolled with their tiny dogs, where men walked with their pipes and smart conversations. Paris's garden, I thought. Wouldn't it be a lovely place to bump into him, to spend a little time? I smoothed my hair and hurried after him into the garden. Inside it was even more beautiful, with the Palais's golden columns and its fountains sparkling in the sun, and the shady promenades beneath the line of trees. It suited him. Marius sat down on a wooden bench, partly shaded. I sat down on another bench a little distance from him. He took a book from his pocket, crossed his left leg over his right leg, and started to read. He looked so peaceful that I couldn't go to him. I just watched him. I wondered what I might say to him, how to start a conversation, and I imagined his answers in my head. Only when the shadows lengthened did he stand up and fold his book away. He walked quickly as if following somebody, like I was following him. But out on the boulevard Saint-Germain, he looked from left to right and scratched his head. Whoever he'd been following was gone. He started to go there every day. He chose the same bench in the sunshine and always carried a book. I also saw that he always wore the same clothes, a suit with a cravat and polished shoes. They seemed a strange choice for hot weather, but he looked handsome in them. I will speak to him today, I thought. I thought this most days. But one day I told myself, today is the day. I brushed my hair and washed my clothes, and I'd eaten mint to sweeten my breath. I was ready to walk by his side again. I found I couldn't sit on the bench where I normally did because an old man was sleeping on it. Hat tipped over his face, so I found another. This one was beside a rose bush. Its roses were deeply perfumed, such a sweet smell amongst the city's stench. The flowers half hid me, so I had to move them to see Marius's face. From this new angle I could see that his eyes weren't on the pages at all. Had they ever been? He was just pretending to read, because his eyes were actually looking towards an avenue of trees. I didn't understand. What was he looking at? I followed his gaze. 2 people were sitting on a bench, as he was. One was a man with greying hair and a soft, kind face, no yellow coat. The yellow coat was gone. And the other was a girl with sunshine-coloured hair. His love. Everyone has daydreams. I've had plenty of them. I used to dream of finding a louis d'or coin on the ground, or of my mother throwing me up in the air with delight, crying out, "Éponine!" Later, I had daydreams of a prince passing by on a white horse. He'd point at me and say, "Her," and I'd be plucked from my life and into a better one. Then there was Marius, and all these daydreams fell away. After our sunset walk through Paris, I had just 4 daydreams in the world, and I handled them like jewels. In the first, Marius was sitting on his bench in Les Jardins du Luxembourg. He turned and said, "Will you join me, Éponine?" And I nodded and sat beside him. From there he told me all about the world, politics, travel, art, love. We smiled at each other, and like this, we passed the day. In my second daydream, he was walking. His face struck up like a match on seeing me. "Éponine, why? I was thinking about you at that very moment." He came to me, took my hands and kissed them and said, "I must tell you, I must tell you, the truth is, I'm lost without you. Since we walked back from the Café Musain together, I cannot sleep or eat." In my third daydream, it wasn't a book in his lap. It was a notebook, and he was writing poetry in it. "I know what true beauty is. It's Éponine." He thought this, despite my torn dress and muddy feet. But my fourth daydream was my favourite. It was a wordless dream. He didn't speak in it, and I didn't either. He simply found me in Les Jardins, touched my cheek very lightly. Were we by the fountains? Sometimes. Or in those half-lit avenues? Then he held me as gently, and his nose would touch my nose, and like this I felt safe and loved. Those were my 4 daydreams. Over and over I cradled them. But they died as I moved those roses aside. They died when I saw Marius's face, filled with love, desire, wonder, looking at another girl's face. "Look. Oh, no, no, no." I stumbled away from my bench and onto my knees, my hands to my mouth. Cosette? Could it really be her? She wasn't wearing a sackcloth anymore, just as I thought she would not. Instead, she wore a floral printed frock with a cream lace trim and a bonnet with a satin bow. She sat so neatly, with her hands in her lap and her ankles pressed together, that I almost didn't recognise her. But I did. I knew it was her. There was no doubt. The girl who'd slept in cobwebs. The girl who'd scrubbed every floor, left, right, on her knees. Euphrasie. But everyone calls me Cosette. The gentleman was Jean Valjean. Age had greyed his hair at the sides, and he seemed wider in the chest, but he still had the same kind face I remembered. He was glancing at what she held. A book, like Marius. And like Marius, she was only pretending to read it. Her eyes were fixed on his. I brought my hands away from my mouth. They are staring at each other. They were. I looked down at the ground where I was kneeling, at the stones and rose petals, but all I could think of was their faces, how they'd smiled at each other across the flower beds. 8 years since I had seen her. I felt lots of things. Grief, sorrow, jealousy. I felt stupid for thinking he could ever love me too, because what was I? Stupid for having washed your face and eaten mint and felt hopeful. I felt shocked as well, as if I'd dropped a wondrous thing, glass-made and dazzling, and it had broken into a million pieces so that I had nothing left at all. This, too, I felt angry. It rose up like a river and it flooded everything. That brat and the boy I loved. It isn't fair. It isn't fair. I've tried to be good. I've looked for beauty in all things, and I've been kind when I can be, and I've only ever stolen because I was ordered to. I've prayed for little Gavroche. I've picked peaches for a crippled man, and I've been thankful for the tiny things, like the stars and bird song and a warm chestnut. She has everything. She's got beauty and grace and nice clothes and a father who loves her. It's not fair that she has Marius too. I marched from Le Jardin. I kicked a stone. I muttered, "What's the point?" And I remembered my mother's words from many years ago. What use is there in kindness? Be cruel, be cunning, be strong. I was so angry, and sad and jealous and lonely. I'd wanted him to like me. I'd wanted his sunshine after years of cold and dark. The pebble in my heart was back, and it went knock, 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 louder and stronger than ever. And I wasn't the only angry person in Paris. Everyone was fed up of their poverty and rumbling bellies, while the king ate veal with silver knives and forks. Everyone was tired of feeling hopeless and grubby and cold like me. We all wanted to rise up in anger, fight, kill. I ran up the stairs of the Gorbeau thinking, I'll be cruel again. I'll hiss and spit at her and I'll make her sorry for having a pretty face. I would not be kind anymore. I would be a true Thénardier like I promised I'd be long ago. The plan. I flung open the door. My parents looked up. Maman was using a stone to crush a bone for its marrow, and Papa was smoking his pipe. Eponine, what have you got? Money or jewels? Better than that. I found a rich man. What? Where? In the Jardin du Luxembourg. Maman dropped the stone, hobbled forwards. How do you know he's rich? Is he dressed smartly? Well-spoken? No, not smartly. And I haven't heard his voice. Then how do you know? He might be quite poor. I shook my head. He'd got money, I was sure. How else could he dress Cosette in such fine clothes? Nor had I forgotten the louis d'or that he'd placed in a wooden shoe 8 years before. I'm certain he's rich. He's careful with his money, that's all. But he'll give to a worthy cause, I reckon, like a starving child. My father gave his foxy smile. I like this. You're sure? He'll give? As sure as I can be. I think we should give him one of Papa's letters. We should give him the very best letter that Papa has ever written. In Le Jardin du Luxembourg, you say? Yes. I could give him the letter and trick him. I felt vengeful, on fire. We must get every penny from him. Papa began to write the note. He was careful. He wanted the perfect letter. He began to write it and then, irritated, threw the paper in the fire. He started a second time and then roared with frustration. This is rubbish! I've got to write something subtle, clever. This letter must be just right. I watched him. I sat by the window, chewing my fingernails. After several days, he said, What's his name, this man? Do you know? I nearly said, Yes, Papa. It is Jean Valjean. But something stopped me, and I kept the secret inside. Papa would surely recognise the name. He'd pause and narrow his eyes and say, "Didn't we meet him once? Didn't he buy that wretched Cosette? For far too small a sum? Ha! That nasty do-good of a man." They hated him, and they might do more than trick him with letters if they knew who he was. Papa still had that bone-handled knife. This is my consolation. I thought of tricking him with the letter, but that was all. I didn't want to hurt him or Cosette, and so I never said their names. I was heartbroken, but I never wanted their deaths. Eponine wishes. He loves her. I looked at my reflection in shop windows or the passing glass of carriages. I thought, why her, not me? But I knew why. I'd always known she was beautiful. I was 4 years old when we met, and even then her hair was gold and shiny. She wore sackcloth, and she scrubbed the grease from the walls, yet I watched her and thought, I wish I looked like you. What part of Cosette had made the people in Montfermeil whisper, "Poor dove," when they saw her, or "Such a pretty thing," before moving on with their own small lives? She was neat. She had elegance, so that even when she swept the yard, she did so very daintily. Her hair curled at the ends, her lips were rose-coloured, her eyes were like pools, blue, deep, reflecting the trees and the sky. In Les Jardins, she looked exactly the same. She was older, but she was still Cosette. I stood on the Rue Christine. It was evening. I could see my reflection in the candlemaker's window. Of course he loves her, not me, I thought, for the girl who looked back at me was drab and bruised and impossibly thin. All the thistles in the world had not made her hair tidy. Knots still hung on it with feathers and twigs. Her collarbone stuck out. Her forehead was lined. She didn't have either a waist or a chest to speak of. Her lips were cracked and dry. Of course he'd choose Cosette. It would be like choosing between a puddle and the sea, a snapped stick and a springtime tree, a pebble and a mountain. I was so silly to think he'd love me, silly to think he liked walking beside me that day. I stole again. I returned to being the Eponine from the Sergeant of Waterloo who plucked rings off fingers, snapped buckles off shoes. I did no good deeds. I only thought, why bother? It didn't seem worth it anymore. I walked home with sous in my pockets. A wind blew, and the few thin trees were turning brown. Autumn was coming. My hopes for a better life, for a kind and loving one, were blown away with the leaves. The letter is delivered. It took several weeks. Then, at the start of the October, I woke to find Papa standing over me, holding the letter. "Done," he said. "My best letter yet. Your turn now." It began, "Monsieur, forgive me for writing to you and for troubling you in such a way. I write humbly, and if any inconvenience or discomfort should occur as a result of this letter, then I apologize sincerely and on my knees." I looked up at him, amazed. This didn't sound like Papa at all. He cracked his knuckles, smiling. "Impressed? Well, I thought I should be polite. He's a gentleman, you say?" I read the rest of the letter. In it, he'd written, "We are dying, monsieur. My children are. We have our wits, but wits cannot always feed us. Others may steal in these dark times, but we are good, religious folk and wouldn't steal a feather from a passing bird. All we can do is ask for help from other godly souls like you, monsieur. Take it to him. Cough. Say you are ill. Look thinner than that. Look thinner? How could I make myself look thinner? Dirty your face, called Maman. Use ash from the fire. Let's find horse dung in the street and... They tried these things. They smeared my face and clothing until Papa nodded. Better. But still, it isn't quite enough. A cough and a dirty face are good, but we need more. He thought for a moment. Then he raised his hand. I looked up at it and wondered why it was there. Then he hit me. His fist met my cheek and I fell against the fireplace. The pain was quick and hot. Luke! Maman squawked. What did you strike the girl for? She's been stealing well for us lately. I felt a warm trickle coming from my nose. It pooled on my top lip and I tasted blood. To mark her, you stupid woman. She's got to look as poor and needy as we can make her. A swelling will rise up now. She can say she was robbed in the street, or that she was injured whilst defending a poorer soul than herself, or perhaps she struggled against a man who wished her to enter into dark dealings, and her noble heart refused to... It'll get his pity, you see. I caught my nosebleed in cupped hands. My cheek began to swell up, closing my right eye so I could hardly see. Papa was triumphant. See? See how awful she looks? Maman mopped my bloodied hands with her skirt. Stop whimpering, child. Your father's right. This is a good plan. We'll leave some blood on your face because it does make you look more pitiful. Now, deliver your letter. Go. Autumn smell was in the air. Wood smoke, leaves. I stumbled towards Les Jardins du Luxembourg, past the old tannery, the quarries and the pits, past the graveyard. I made it to Boulevard Saint-Germain. I didn't care that people were staring at my bleeding face. For nearly a month, all I'd thought of was him and her, Marius and Cosette. Le Jardin de Luxembourg looked different. The trees were coppery and the flowers were mostly gone. It was nearly a month since I'd been there. What if they didn't come here anymore? If it was too cold to read their books in the open air? His bench was empty. No Marius. I blinked painfully. What of Cosette and Jean Valjean? There. There they were, but they weren't sitting. Instead, they were walking arm in arm, scuffing through the fallen leaves. She wore a coat trimmed with fox fur, and his muffler was high round his neck. I hadn't got a scarf of my own. Instead, I half hid my face with my waist-long hair. 8 years had passed, but I didn't want to risk them recognising me. Briefly, I felt very guilty. But then I remembered, he loves her, not you. Cosette, who has everything. And it made me walk towards them. Monsieur, un moment, s'il vous plaît? They turned. I felt like I was standing in the tavern in Montfermeil again. Was it Christmas Eve? Was I a child, playing with the cat? Mademoiselle, can I help? He saw the threadbare clothes and the peeling skin and the dirt. He stared through my hair at my swollen eye and bloodied nose. His gaze seemed kinder than it had ever been. Cosette gasped, a dainty feminine gasp. Papa! Her face! The poor creature! I thought, be cruel, Eponine. I held the letter out. Would you read this, monsieur? I feel ashamed to have to trouble you and your daughter in this way, and please shoo me away if I offend you with my rag and tatters. Others do. I'm used to it. Only, please know that we are very desperate and I choose you because you have a kindly face. He read the letter. Cosette read it too, leaning on his upper arm. She murmured, Mon Dieu, very sadly. Then Valjean folded the letter. He looked at me, shifted his jaw from side to side. Dying, you say? Yes, sir. My sister is so thin, far thinner than I am. She can't have long to live. And the injury? To your face? That looks freshly done. Defending her, monsieur. She was set upon by some terrible men and I fought them because she is too weak to fight herself. He stood very still as he listened. Forgive me for showing this note to you. If you're unable to assist, then I will only thank you for your time and move elsewhere. We have no choice, you see. And where do you live, precisely? I flinched. Where do we live? I didn't think he'd ask this. The Gorbeau tenement. Is it far? In Salpêtrière, the long dark building that faces the beginning of the Rue de Gobelin. Near the tannery? Yes, near there. I know of it. I'll come to you shortly. I was shocked. What? You'll come? To the Gorbeau? Yes, I will. Because I wish to see your poverty myself. I wish to see your poor, malnourished sister so that I could understand how best to help her. Money alone might not be enough. Tell your family to expect me. I shall be with you by the evening. I wasn't sure what to say. He'd come to the Gorbeau? What would my parents say? He was meant to simply give me some coins, a franc or two, here in Les Jardins. I stuttered. I'll tell them. Thank you. He did give me a coin, a franc. That is for you. On your way home, stop in the market or on a street corner and find a little food for yourself, because no creature can stay as thin as you are. I nodded and turned, and as I did, I heard Cosette say, Oh, how can she bear it? The poor dear thing. I ran, thinking, he's coming to Gorbeau. But I also ran with an ache in my belly, deep down. It wasn't hunger. It was the ache I'd had when I heard of the bishop being stabbed, and when I saw Babet's eye through the hole in the wall. It came when I felt unsafe and frightened. Trouble is on its way. I was sure of it. The streets grew dark and cold. The fire is put out. I threw open the door. He's coming! Papa sprang from the chair. Maman and Azalma were both crouching by the fire, blowing on their hands. What? Who? The rich man. Coming here? Papa's eyes flashed. Yes, I gave him the letter and he read it. I was puffing, and he said he'd come here to see how poor we are, to see how he could help us. By giving us money? That's how he can help us. Maman spat into the fire. Why the hell is he coming here? But Papa stroked his bristly chin. In a thoughtful voice he said, When? This evening, he said. On his own? I think so. He's got a daughter, but I don't think he'll bring her. He seems protective. Like a papa should be, I thought. Papa started to smile. He paced the room, said, Perfect. This is perfect. Let me think. Oh, yes, what a wonderful plan this is. A plan? Azelma didn't understand. None of us did. "Give me that bucket." He seized it from Maman and threw water on the fire. Maman screeched. "What the hell are you doing? That fire is the only heat we've got. It's bitter outside and they say sleet is coming, and how are we going to keep warm now? Or cook? You stupid—" Papa ignored her. He took the wooden chair and broke it. "The poorer we look, the better. Azelma, break the window pane." "What?" She straightened. She tended to do as she was told, but now she frowned at him. "Break it? But it's so cold, Papa. The fire is gone, and if it starts to sleet, as Maman says—" "Don't talk back to me. Just break it." "Papa!" "We want him to feel sorry for us, girl. We want him to think we're the most wretched and miserable creatures in Paris, cold and perishing and thin. So break that window. Do it." She crept to the window. She looked unsure. "How should I break it?" "With your fist." I should have said no, because I knew that she'd hurt herself that way. But Azelma did it anyway. She punched the glass and two sounds followed, the tinkling of glass falling on the street below, and Azelma screaming, "Oh! Oh, the blood! Oh, it hurts, Maman!" A sharp wind rushed into the room. Maman hobbled to Azelma, snapping at Papa. "Oh, well done, Luke. One daughter with a swollen face and the other with a bleeding arm. A fine job. Azelma, stop wailing. The worse they look, the better. Don't you understand?" He reached for his coat, said, "Now I must tell the others." I looked up. "What others?" "Ha! A rich man coming here, and all on his own. It's like a lamb coming to a butcher's shop, don't you think? With the others we'll be able to get every penny from him, every button, every silk thread. We'll tie him up if we have to. And if he tries to struggle, well, Babet and Claxou know a trick or two." The patron Minette. My heart turned to stone. I couldn't speak. He went to the door and called back, "Azelma, when he comes, you've got to act like you're dying. Don't staunch the blood or clean yourself up. Josephine, hide your stick and say you can't walk at all. And Eponine, you'll be our lookout. Stand beneath the dead white tree by the cemetery, and if you see a gendarme or any nosy soul, run back and tell us. Understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just rubbed his hands and left the room saying, "A fortune is coming, I can feel it." We listened to his footsteps as he hurried away. A butcher's shop? A lamb? Oh, what have I done? I trembled. As Azelma stared at her bleeding arm, and as Maman shivered by the damp hearth, I just thought of Montfermeil. I thought of the kitchen there. Rabbits slung on hooks, plucked hens, meat. Whatever happened to the girl who tried to be kind? Who'd polished the church's brass knocker and lifted insects from the old nag's drinking trough? I'd never felt worse than I did at that moment. They're going to kill Valjean tonight. Beneath the dead white tree. I found the dead white tree by the cemetery and pressed myself against its bark. What can I do? How can I stop this? I couldn't run to the gendarmerie because where might I find them? And they'd probably only get to the Gorbeau too late. I couldn't call out, "Help! Help!" because the patron Minette would be lurking nearby now and might kill me to make me be quiet. All I could hope for was that Valjean might walk past me. I could warn him then. It began to sleet. It came through the leafless branches and stung my swollen cheek. It made it hard to see, but I kept watching the street in case Valjean should come. I imagined him, his scarf, his hat, the greying parts of his hair. "Don't come here," I'd tell him. "Stay away." The sleet grew worse and worse. In the cemetery, I heard noises, a twig snapping and the scuttle of a rat. I'm alone in the cold and dark, I thought. There weren't even any stars. But I wasn't alone. I smelt tobacco. Then I heard the slow, careful tread of boots on wet ground, a man's footsteps. I stepped out from the tree. "Who's there?" It was Montparnasse. He was completely in shadow, but I knew it was him. I could smell the oil he put in his hair and see the red tip of his cigarette. "Well, well," he exhaled, blowing smoke above me. "Mademoiselle Eponine, what can you be doing on the corner of a cemetery on such an unpleasant night?" He stepped forwards so that I could see him better. "It'll be snowing," he went on, "before long. I'd sooner find a fireside, wouldn't you?" I said nothing. "I'm confused, mademoiselle. You see, this is the hour for dark deeds, I think. For theft and trickery. No honest person would be out in this weather and so late. But you? A thief? Surely not. Because the last time we met on the Rue de Rivoli, you told me that you believed in love." He was mocking me. "You know why I'm here," I muttered. "Yes, I do. A rich horse is being unsaddled in Salpêtrière tonight. Babet told me." "Babet is close by?" "Oh, yes. He's hiding in the shadows, too. They're waiting for their moment to sneak into the Gorbeau." "You'll sneak in too? Surely you'd never miss the chance to rob a man." His smile widened. "True, I never do. But I hear your room's small, and you've seen the size of Gourmet. No, I'm staying outside. I'll make sure the gentleman doesn't escape his chains." "Chains?" "Or ropes. They'll bind him?" "It's easier that way." "To steal?" "To take everything." He inhaled, held the smoke in his mouth as he looked at me. "Your face." He exhaled. His voice was softer. "What's happened to it?" "Someone hit me." "Who?" I shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "Why should it matter? What's a wounded face to you? You hurt people all the time." "But," he murmured, "I would never hurt you." The sleet was growing thicker now, turning to snow. It was settling on the ground. Snow seemed to make Paris look so beautiful because it covered up the dirt, and it made the city look new again, and I thought, make it better. Hide my lies. Save Valjean. Montparnasse came closer. "Snow. It must look very pretty to a girl who believes in goodness." He dropped the cigarette onto the floor, stepped on it. "It was endearing," he said. "Endearing? What was?" "How fiery you were when you spoke of love." Love. We both looked out at the falling snow. I thought of Marius, holding my hand very briefly. In the Gorbeau, I could see a few candles. I said, "Will they kill this man?" Montparnasse was quiet for a while. "They'd rather not. A body is difficult to deal with. How will they carry it or hide it? No, they prefer him to live. Perhaps they could hold him to ransom. He has a daughter, hasn't he?" I heard him smile, the click of lips against gums. I can't imagine there's a single thing that a daughter wouldn't do to save her father's life. I closed my eyes. It was never meant to be like this. It was only ever meant to be a coin or two. Montparnasse. Ma belle? All of this is so wrong. Wrong? Says the girl who arranged every bit of it. You found this man and you gave him the letter. I tell you I was impressed when I heard that, Eponine. Shall I tell you something? I was good-hearted once, like you. I wanted to live an honest life. But then I was orphaned and Babet took care of me and he taught me all he knew. I owe my life to him, I think, he said. I was born to steal. I'm made for it, as you are. I shook my head. I'm not made for it. I'm not. Don't pretend, Eponine. You're a Thénardier. A dishonest life is all you've ever known. We're Jondrettes here. That's our name. You think that changes anything? Jondrette is just paint on rotten wood, or... He held out his hand. Snow on filthy streets. You're still a Thénardier beneath it all. I couldn't answer him. He was right. I could never change my parentage or the name I was born with. As for your face... He laid a single finger upon my swollen cheek. There may be dirt and blood upon it, but I know that underneath it, well, you're beautiful. I felt like crying then. I let his finger stay on me. Was he mocking me? Surely he'd seen Cosette or ladies like her and knew what proper beauty was. Maybe he was, but it didn't really matter. Marius had made me feel beautiful, but no one had called me beautiful in my whole life. In a tiny voice I said, I am? Oh yes, so very beautiful. He held my face with both his hands. We'd make a fine team, mademoiselle. A team? You and I. What couldn't be ours if we worked together? Stealing and plotting as two people, not one. I find diamonds for you. I put pearls in your ears. He stroked me, almost tenderly. I'd steal the queen's gown for my own bright queen. I closed my eyes. I had never been touched like this, like I was precious. When I opened my eyes again, Montparnasse was looking at me in a way I recognised. It was how Marius had looked at Cosette in Le Jardin. His eyes were bright and his lips were parted. He took my wrist. Come with me. I followed him, because he'd called me beautiful, and because I wanted Marius, and because I was tired. I was so tired. He was looking at me like I'd always hoped someone would. We went deeper into the cemetery, tripping over tree roots and broken stones. He said, What a life we could live, you and I. What a world I could show you. Then he kissed me. But it was not a gentle kiss. Montparnasse pressed his lips against mine and clutched at my dress, and he pushed me against a gravestone very roughly, and his tongue filled my mouth so I couldn't breathe. I closed my eyes and pretended this was not Montparnasse. Pretend this is Marius, whose friends cheer when he walks into a room. But I couldn't make myself believe it. This wasn't Marius. Marius would never, ever, ever kiss someone like this. Get off! No! I squirmed and broke free. I didn't want Montparnasse's mouth and hands upon me any more, and it didn't matter that he called me beautiful. He didn't make me feel beautiful at all, just unsafe and foolish, and more alone than ever. He didn't let me go, so I kicked him. He said, Why, you little... Then I stamped on his foot and ran away. I leapt over the graves and stumbled through the snow, and I kept running because I wanted to be free of him and my family and the name Thénardier. Where was the happy life? The stars, the wayside flowers. Where was goodness? It was in other people, not in me. It was in Marius, in the man who'd bought Cosette a beautiful doll one Christmas Eve and said to my parents, "I'll take her to a better life." I'll run to the Gorbeau tenement. I'll set Valjean free. I'll shout for help, even if the patron Minette are there. I'll fight with my father if I have to. But I didn't get the chance, because an arm caught me. It wrapped itself around my neck and pulled me to my knees, and I thought, it's Montparnasse wanting more than a kiss. So I flailed and I bit at the arm and I shouted, "Get off!" But it wasn't Montparnasse. It was a stronger arm. "Got you!" A man's voice I didn't know. I stopped biting and looked up. I saw a neat moustache, 2 beady eyes. He was baring his teeth and not blinking. It was a face of resentment, anger, and purpose. He wore a policeman's hat. The gendarme. He lifted me from the ground by my dress so my feet pedalled the air. "You'd bite me, would you? Fight like a cat? You can't escape from me." "I thought you were someone else," I wheezed. "I know who you are. You're the lookout, and a failed lookout too." "A lookout? Monsieur, I don't know what you mean." "Liar. I've seen you in the Gorbeau tenement with Monsieur Jondrette, if that's his proper name, which I doubt it is." "Lookout? I don't know." "Yes, you do. Do you think I'm stupid? Me, Javert? I know." He tapped his nose with his spare hand, "that you were told to stand here and keep a lookout for gendarmes like me." I couldn't keep lying. I was done with lies, so I said, "What's happened there tonight? Please tell me. Yes, I was the lookout, but I don't know anything else." He lowered me so that my feet touched the ground, but kept hold of me. "Theft. Murder. In the Gorbeau tenement." "What? Murder? A person has died," I wailed. "Not the man with the yellow waistcoat, Monsieur le Gendarme. Please, not him." He frowned. "A yellow waistcoat? No one was wearing such a thing." "I mean the gentleman with the kind face, the one we lured." "We? Who we lured?" He half smiled. "I've got my confession, it seems. No, he didn't die, although he was badly wounded. He broke from his ties and jumped from the window." I exhaled, relieved. Not him. "So who? Who is dead?" "Another." "Which other?" "Not a Jondrette. They've all been caught, like you. It's off to prison for your whole family now." "Prison?" "Oui, prison. I know this little trick was your idea, mademoiselle. Your father told me so. He blames you, and your mother and sister do too." "They blame me?" "All your fault, they said. Said you're the worst of them." He hauled my wrists behind me, and I felt handcuffs snapping on. I gave up. I didn't fight. I was strangely calm. It's done, I thought. For so long we'd hidden from the gendarmerie. We'd slept in caves and moved by night and been scared of shadows. But now it was all over. Prison had always been waiting, in the end. The snow had never looked more beautiful than it did as we walked through it. I thought of the people I loved. Gavroche, freckled and bright. Had he been lucky, after all, escaping the Thénardiers on that riverbank? Valjean, who deserved so much better. Please let him mend. I imagined him lying by candlelight with Cosette tending to his wounds with a cloth and a basin of water. And of course, Marius. These handcuffs, his love for Cosette had changed nothing. I still loved him more than anyone else I'd ever met, even though he didn't love me. I knew that. And so I thought of him most of all as I was led away from the tenement, away from him, through the falling snow. Book 5. Madelonette. The prison stood between the Rue Volta and the Rue de Verbois, north of the river. It was made from the darkest stone I'd ever seen, a sort of soot black. It looked even darker in the snow. Madelonette. It used to be a convent, but I couldn't imagine nuns here. Now it was where all the worst women were taken and left, for months or years. We went inside. A man was sitting at a table, and the gendarme said, "This one's Eponine. I doubt Jondrette is her surname, but write that down as well." I watched the ink write Eponine, and I thought, yes, that's my name. They took me through the prison yard. I looked up, but it was too snowy for stars. I thought of old Auguste at that moment. Once I'd asked him how old he was, and he'd said, "Old, very old." "As old as the stars?" "Ah, no. The stars are older than everything." I remember thinking, they must have seen so many sad things. Those stars would have seen every single sin since human beings existed, and yet they weren't shining above me the night I went to prison. It was as if they turned away from me, as if my cruelty against Valjean and Cosette had been the worst of all. At the cell door, the policeman took off my handcuffs. A single lantern flickered on the wall. He shook his head as though all the world's problems were caused by me and said, "If you're not cured of your wickedness here, you'll never be cured." And he pushed me into the cell, locked the door. I was in that cell for 17 nights. I wasn't alone. It was tiny, half the size of our room in the Gorbeau, with no hearth and no glass for the single window, and yet there were 10 of us in there. I counted by the light of the candle. 9 pairs of eyes looked back at me. It was such a small room that we sat with skin pressed against skin, and I think our bodies' warmth helped us, but we still shivered. One girl's face was scarred as if by a knife. Another had lice, so she scratched and scratched until her skin bled. One woman rocked to herself, wild-eyed, whispering, "Jean-Jacques, où est Jean-Jacques?" And then she'd search the cell for him. We were all the same, all lost and tired. These weren't the boasters or braggers of Paris. They weren't like my father, who'd crow about his dealings and laugh at his own tales. None of us were proud of what we'd done. Some cried, but others didn't shed a single tear in those 17 nights that I was there. Perhaps we're born with all the tears we'll ever shed, and they'd cried them all and had none left. On a night of heavy snow, one of the women spoke to me. She was balding and had a single tooth left, peg-like. "What was it? For you?" I sniffed, thought about my answer. Theft. Years of it. And I had a part in a man being hurt very badly. "Years? You're young still." 16, I think. I'd lost count. "Too young for prisons. They'll take you out. You'll see." "Is it? My sister's in here too, and she's younger still." "Then they'll release both of you. Give it time." "What of you?" "Theft too, and worse. I sold what no woman should ever have to sell." I understood her meaning. She slept, and I leaned back against the cell wall, looked out of the small window at the falling snow. Was it November? I didn't know. I thought of the holly we used to have in the inn in Montfermeil at Christmas, when I still had warm clothes and dreams. It snowed and snowed. Each day we'd have to push a new layer of snow off the windowsill. Our food was a half-frozen bowl of watery broth and a crust of blackened bread. We had a single shared bucket in the corner of the cell. Sometimes we were allowed to walk out in the yard, and I liked that. It was bitterly cold, but it was cleaner air, and I'd walk with my hands tucked under my armpits for warmth. I looked for Maman and Azelma in the yard, and I wondered if they looked for me too. Did they miss me? Or worry? On the 5th day, I glimpsed Azelma. I looked up and thought, that girl looks like Azelma, but it can't be her because she's so old-looking and her hair's so thin I can see her scalp beneath it. But it was her. I stumbled. Zell? She turned. Zell! Oh, Zell, how are you? Look at you, you're so thin. Look at you, she retorted. What a sorry state. What a mess. Look at the stains on your dress and the scabs on your face. I flinched, confused. Briefly I thought, maybe this isn't Azelma after all, because she was being so hateful and sharp. But I saw the red wounds on her arm from where she'd punched the window pane. She was definitely my sister. Does it still hurt? Your arm? What do you care? You're so cross with me. Why? Of course I'm cross, she hissed. Weren't you meant to be the lookout? Weren't you meant to be guarding your family, Eponine? Ha! She folded her arms. I hear you were with Montparnasse, kissing in the shadows. He matters more to you than we do, does he? No, he doesn't. And yet you didn't see the policeman, did you? 6 gendarmes came to us, Eponine. 6. They must have walked straight past you while you were having that nice little fumble in the dark. They came into the Gorbeau and broke the door down and arrested us. She hissed like a cat. It was your job to protect us. We are all in prison because of you. I couldn't answer. My mouth opened and closed. You know Maman is ill. Ill? She's got a sickness. Nothing stays inside her, not even water. You've seen her? A little. I've held her hand through the bars. She prefers me, said Azelma. She always did. I'm her proper daughter. I felt those words, like a punch. We stared at each other. Where was the thumb-sucking toddler who used to call me Ponine? Azelma hobbled away from me. I could see her cracked heels, like hooves, as Cosette's used to be. I saw too the shape of her shoulder blades through her dress. She tried to walk with dignity, but how could she? None of us could. That night I whispered to the woman with the pegged tooth. I've lost so much. You're lucky. It means you had something to lose in the first place. Me? I had nothing. That night I thought about what had been and gone. I watched the snow falling outside the cell and remembered the swifts that darted past the inn and Azelma's doll and the outline of trees from our bedroom window. The church's smell and the butcher's dog, the owl's hoot as we ran through a nighttime field, and the starriest nights I'd ever seen. The safety of the upturned boat, the hug between Cosette and her mother which rocked from side to side, how we'd fed baby Gavroche with our milky thumbs, Cosette and me. Life, I thought, goes by so quickly. I cried a little, but maybe the peg-toothed woman was right. I'd had my happy moments and my own special times. I'd known Azelma before she grew hard. I'd known how it felt to lie in the long grass with my little brother and see the blowing clouds. I thought of my mother too. twirling her skirts and saying, "Am I pretty, girls?" She hadn't always been crippled and sour, and in my head she wasn't dying of a fever in a freezing prison. She was watching her daughters swing from the rusted wagon on that bright sunny morning after weeks of rain. When I read her romance novels in The Sergeant of Waterloo, I sometimes found the tips of pages folded over or parts of the story underlined in ink. These were the bits she liked, I think. Beneath the rage and greed and wiry hair, maybe there was still a girl like me who liked to dream of romance. An end and a beginning. She died on our final day in prison. Azelma found me in the snowy yard and said, "Maman is dead," very flatly. I thought it wasn't true. How could it be? I could still see Maman, her puckered mouth and the dirt beneath her fingernails. How could she be gone for always? Dead? Yes, they've taken her body away. They'll throw her in some grave that's meant for prisoners. Still such hardness in Azelma. Also, we're getting out. What? They're releasing us. We're too young to be here, and so tomorrow we'll be out on the streets again. I nodded. What then? I'll find Papa. I know which prison he's in. Babet will take care of me until Papa breaks out of there and finds me. She sniffed. I'll live with Babet and Montparnasse. What will you do? I didn't know. I said, maybe I'll wait for Papa too. But I could tell Azelma didn't believe me. I didn't believe myself. There was a wide, wide space between myself and my family now, and I thought, he'll never forgive me for not being the lookout. I didn't belong with them anymore. I don't know what I'll do. I couldn't sleep that night. The others in my cell did, coughing and moaning, but I stayed awake. Dead. It seemed impossible. Maman had been so real and strong. How could she be lying in a pauper's grave now? But as I watched the moon come out through the cell bars, I wondered if there was a part of my mother that wasn't dead at all. I cried for her. But then I realised I was feeling something else as well. It was strange, as if my heart and head were lighter than they'd been before. By daybreak, I could name it. It's relief, I thought. I was relieved because I didn't have to steal anymore, because I didn't have to trick or lie or hand out cunning letters to the rich. I didn't have to take orders from my parents or be scared of being asked, "Well, what have you found for us? We all depend on you, you know." I didn't have to hide my wanting heart away from them. I was free, at last. I could actually be me now, the Eponine I'd always wanted to be. Here's what I decided in that prison cell as the sky lightened. I will live alone. I'll do all the good, kind acts I've ever wanted to. I won't steal. I won't lie. I'll make people's lives better whenever I can manage it, and I'll never, ever do cruel things again. I made another promise, too. I hadn't forgotten how nasty I'd been to Cosette. As a child, I had hit her and spat at her and called her names, and for 8 years I'd felt the shame of it. I'd never truly got rid of how sorry I felt. I'll make amends, I vowed, now and for the rest of my life. I nodded. I liked this vow. And him? Marius. I still ached for him. But he'd called me generous and smart, and this would be enough. I'd be these things for him. Did I still think it was unfair, that he didn't love me back? Yes, I did. I wanted him to. But I learned that life wasn't fair. If it was, we'd have had no need to pluck rings from fingers or buttons from coats. Widow Amandine wouldn't have been widowed. Gavroche wouldn't have been left behind. A woman called Fantine wouldn't have needed to leave her only child at an inn in Montfermeil. Cats wouldn't kill mice and leave them uneaten. Kings wouldn't grow fat on their thrones while their people begged in their rags. At least I'm still here, I thought then. At least I'm still alive.